I would like to go over the toggleClass method. First, I would like to show a few examples. Here we have a sign in, and when I click, I get a menu. When I click again, it disappears. We're pretty familiar with this. This is technically a toggle on and off switch here. These collapse and expand menus are also very popular. You click, you see something, you click, it goes away. Now we have developed a similar application using JavaScript using the setAttribute method. It was relatively involved because we had to use an if, determine if the class existed. If so, do this. If not, do that. And again, we were working with an attribute, not the actual CSS class. I have 3 files in the sample code, and they're all different. However, they're all related to how this method works. Here is the first one, the toggleClass method, and I am clicking on the div. There are 2 divs here, and notice I'm changing the color. Let's take a look at the code. Here I have my jQuery framework. Now I have the jQuery code. I am using the document.ready, and all of my code is placed in there. Because this code will not be read until the DOM has loaded, you can place this in the head section. In my HTML, I have 2 divs. They both have a class of red. This is my CSS, and this is my class selector. In the code, I am clicking on the div itself. Notice my jQuery selector. It is an element selector. Element selectors technically constitute an array. Remember, get elements by tag name because there typically is more than one. However, notice that we don't have to loop through this to add the click event. We just use the div element selector. jQuery does all of that work behind the scenes for you. Now, when I click on the div, my selector again is div. Then I add the method, .toggleClass. This is a method. I am executing that method on that object, meaning the div. And the name of the class I am toggling is red. Please note the difference in the syntax. The CSS class selector has a dot in front of the name. When we use toggleClass, we want the name of the class. The name of the class is red. When we apply that class in the HTML document, its class equals red. So we have some uses of the word red that are not necessarily all the same. It has to do with the difference between JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. Now, because I am clicking on the div element, it will affect every div in this page, and there are 2. So here, I'm changing both of them at the same time. And that's not very useful. I'm just explaining to you how to start understanding how the code works. Now let's look at another file. Now if I click the first div, I am only affecting the first one. If I click the second one, I'm only affecting the second one. This makes a little bit more sense. Everything in the web page is exactly the same with one exception. Rather than using the div selector to execute the toggleClass method, we are using the JavaScript keyword this. If you remember, we use this in traditional JavaScript. The selector is still a div element. However, we want to narrow it down to the instance of the div that is being clicked on. Therefore, we use the keyword this. Now let's take a look at the third file. Now we are going to click on the H2, but we're going to change something else on the page. We're not changing the actual element we're clicking on. So if I click on this H2, I am changing the color of the div underneath it. I click on the second H2, I change the color of the div underneath it. Let's look at the code. This code is almost identical. First, I have added an H2 on top of each div because we will be clicking on that H2. Therefore, our jQuery selector is the H2 element. Now, because we don't want to manipulate all of the H2s, we only want to manipulate one, we use the this keyword to indicate the H2 that is being clicked on. Now we have the next method. The next method indicates the next element. This is very similar to next element sibling in traditional JavaScript. Then we execute the toggleClass method. It is being executed on the next element, not on the H2. We are clicking on the H2. We are manipulating the next element. So here we click on the H2. We toggle that class of red. We click on the H2. We toggle this class of red. Notice how easy this was. No if-elses. It just knows whether the class is there or not, and it does whatever is needed. This is one of the nice advantages of using frameworks. So back to our web examples. I click on something, I manipulate what's underneath. I click on something, I manipulate what's underneath. I click on something, I manipulate what's underneath. Actually, what was underneath we didn't see. I click, something else is happening. Don't forget to use the browser's inspect tool to see what is actually happening with your code. You can see that we have an event attached to both of our H2 elements. Notice that when the page loads, both div elements have a class of red. When I click the first H2, notice the class name red disappears. We are not removing the class attribute, we are only removing the name of that class. It is possible to have more than one class attached to an element using one class attribute. When I click again, we see the red value being restored. So when I click the second H2, the word red disappears. When I click, it comes back. This is the real way you know whether your code is doing what it should be doing.